for a tale from our travels that particularly tickled our sense of the absurd, we present Chapter 19, An Echo in an Empty Archive. Our search for quaint farmhouses in a remote Japanese village took a sharp turn when we stumbled upon a massive golden pyramid museum dedicated to a new religious movement. Here is how a simple sightseeing plan spiraled into an investigation of secret gunpowder, cult leaders, and political assassinations. An Echo in an Empty Archive. Ancient roofs bend low. Hokusai's mountain echoes through museum silence. The king of all postcards, finding the perfect view of Shirakawa-go. My night in the temple was punishing. Sleep refused to arrive, but Japan's most distinguished actors did. In a series of confusing dreams, Hiroyuki Sanada and Ken Watanabe took turns giving me stern, silent looks, presumably critiquing my travel strategy. Their spectral judgment was still ringing in my ears when we woke and made a frantic run for the bus, tiptoeing past morning worshippers with the stealth of burglars making off with the temple bell. We caught it with seconds to spare. A minor victory that felt disproportionate after the previous day's train fiasco. Our destination was Shirakawa-go, a village so famous I was already prepared to be disappointed. I expected a UNESCO-certified tourist trap, a place suffocated by its own postcard perfection. Of course, I wanted to see it, but my enthusiasm was heavily managed. As it turns out, the hype is entirely justified. Immediately after stepping off the bus, my son found a new purpose in life. He was pointing at an irrigation ditch, one of many crystal-clear channels that crisscross the village. The ditches, we soon learned, were full of fat, happy-looking trout, swimming in water so clean it made our city pipes seem like a chemical spill. Our first objective was the official overlook, the Ogimachi Castle observation deck. It's an ambitious name for a place that is famously castle-free. The site is just the footprint of a fortress that belonged to the Uchigumo clan, who were unceremoniously wiped out in the late 16th century. Their loss is our gain. The strategic high ground they chose for spotting enemies now serves the far more critical purpose of providing a panoramic selfie background. From up there, the whole village unfolds. Dozens of farmhouses with their severe thatched roofs cluster in the valley. These roofs, called gasshō-zukuri, are angled so dramatically to shrug off the crushing weight of winter snow. It's a beautiful solution to a brutal problem. For a while, we had the view almost to ourselves, a rare moment of quiet that let the scale of the place sink in. Where time bent its knee, the village of praying hands. After a sleepless night dreaming of samurai movie stars and a mad dash past temple worshippers to catch our bus, the weather in Shirakawa-go was a welcome mercy. It was 72 degrees with a perfect breeze. For the first time on this trip, I didn't feel like I was sweating my tanuki off, and I should probably explain that. A tanuki is a raccoon dog from Japanese folklore, a mischievous trickster famous for having, let's say, biologically improbable testicles. It's a detail that seems entirely out of place until you spend more time in Japan and realize that surreal absurdity is a feature, not a bug. We walked from the bus station down into the village, which looked exactly like every postcard promised. I had arrived a skeptic, convinced the place couldn't possibly live up to the hype, but as we descended, I felt my doubt begin to dissolve. The famous gasshō-zukuri farmhouses, with their thatched roofs pitched so steeply they look like hands clasped in prayer, were genuinely impressive. This wasn't some quaint design choice. It was a clever solution to the region's crushing winter snowfall, a design that also happened to create enormous attics perfect for raising silkworms. Serene, practical, and a bit brilliant. Then things got weirder. A skink darted across our path. I glanced into one of the crystal-clear irrigation ditches flanking the street and saw a trout. Not just any trout, but a beautiful amago, a red-spotted native. Then I saw another, a rainbow trout, which I later learned is called nijimasu. These were American immigrants, direct descendants of fish introduced from California's McCloud River in 1877, who travels all the way to a remote, historically isolated Japanese village to see fish from Northern California. This place, I was quickly learning, had a habit of hiding things in plain sight. Take those cavernous attic spaces. For generations, they were home to the quiet, methodical work of sericulture. But they also pulled double duty. For a time, this peaceful-looking village used those same attics to store potassium nitrate. Who looks at a roof shaped like praying hands and thinks, you know what this attic needs? A key ingredient for gunpowder. It seems the villagers had a side hustle a bit more explosive than silk production, making Shirakawa-go less a quiet mountain retreat and more Japan's most zen-looking munitions depot. It all fit. The gunpowder, the cartoonishly endowed raccoon dogs, the immigrant trout from America. It was another layer to peel back. Just like the land under Narita Airport, or the American origins of Blue Seal ice cream in Okinawa, you just had to look past the serene surface to find the strange and complicated history simmering underneath. The Beautiful Danger, an introduction to Japanese lacquerware. In The Book of Tea, Okakura Kakuzo writes that true beauty can only be discovered by one who mentally completes the incomplete. We walked into a museum in Shirakawa-go, a small place dedicated to hida shunkei, a local style of lacquerware, and it was here. I learned that mentally completing the picture sometimes involves imagining a horrible, body-wide rash. The problem with Japanese lacquer is that it actively tries to injure you. It's made from the sap of the urushi tree, a charming cousin of our old friend, poison ivy. The museum display explained that for centuries, artisans have had to slowly, carefully, and agonizingly build up an immunity to the sap's toxic oils. This isn't a hobby you pick up on a whim. It's a long, blistering commitment to your craft. I imagined the apprentice's first day on the job. Welcome, here's an apron and a gallon of calamine lotion. Try not to scratch your face off before lunch. The process itself is a masterclass in patience. A wood base is prepared, then coated with dozens of whisper-thin layers of this deep, dark, dangerous sap. Each layer has to cure in a warm, humid room, hardening into a natural plastic tougher than a $2 steak. The whole ordeal can take months, even years. Most Japanese lacquer becomes a glossy, opaque shield, usually in a brilliant black or a commanding red. It's beautiful, but it hides the wood completely. This is where the local artisans in Haida apparently scoffed and said, "Hold my sake." The Haida shunki style does the opposite. It's famous for being completely transparent. Instead of covering the wood, the local masters developed a clear lacquer that makes the natural grain the main event. They stain a piece of fine cypress or horse chestnut with a yellow or red pigment, then apply the clear urushi over it. The result is a finish that looks like captured sunlight, a stunning golden amber that makes the wood grain glow from within. It's the high-wire act of woodworking. This method is so honest it's terrifying. The clear coat will rat out any flaw in the wood or the artisan's hand. There is no hiding. It is a technique that celebrates the material. It is a technique that demands perfection. It is a technique that says the most beautiful thing is the truth, even if the truth gives you a terrible itch. Forbidden fiber, from farmhouse to fortress to fortune. Learning that Japan's most beautiful lacquerware is basically a polished, weaponized rash had me thinking about the origins of other luxury goods. It seems that for every stunning object, there's a backstory involving either poison, theft, or some kind of bizarre biological process. Silk, it turns out, checks every box. Now, you might be thinking that silk is just the stuff of fancy ties and questionable pajamas, but for a few millennia, it was a technology so valuable that people were willing to commit espionage and risk execution for it. For ages, silk was China's secret weapon, a national treasure guarded more jealously than a dragon's hoard. The whole business of raising silkworms, a process called sericulture, was a state secret. Revealing the method of coaxing a single, continuous strand of thread from a moth larva was a capital offense. China's customs officials had a zero-tolerance policy on undeclared biological materials, especially when those materials could unravel the national economy. Naturally, a secret that valuable couldn't stay a secret forever. The most popular story of how it got out involves the original corporate spy mission disguised as a wedding. A Chinese princess, packed off to marry a king in Khotan, allegedly smuggled the crucial silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds out of the country by hiding them in her exceptionally elaborate hairdo. It was the most consequential act of follicular treason in history, and it broke China's global monopoly. Of course, once you've pulled off the headdress heist, you have to actually get into the business of worm management. This is where the glamour ends and the hard work begins. The silkworm, which is the larva of the Bombyx mori moth, is the Mariah Carey of the invertebrate world. It eats only fresh mulberry leaves, and it demands a peaceful, quiet environment free from loud noises or strong smells. To get even a single kimono's worth of thread, you need to raise thousands of these pampered caterpillars, feeding them mountains of leaves until they're ready to spin their cocoon. Each worm then excretes a single filament of raw silk from its glands, a sticky thread that can be a half-mile long, wrapping itself into a little oblong prison that it has no idea will soon be a cravat. This whole delicate operation needed a headquarters. In the remote mountain village of Shirakawa-go, that headquarters was the family home. The famous gasshō-zukuri farmhouses, with their steep thatched roofs that look like hands in prayer, weren't just designed to survive the crushing winter snow. Their enormous multi-story attics were built to be silkworm nurseries. The design was ingenious. Heat from the sunken hearth on the ground floor would rise, creating the perfect warm, stable climate for the fussy worms upstairs. It was a self-contained agricultural factory where one part of the house cooked dinner and the other end housed a few thousand insect laborers. The money from this attic-based industry was what allowed villagers to build and maintain these magnificent structures for centuries, turning worm saliva into architectural heritage. This highly wasn't just a local phenomenon. By the 20th century, raw silk was Japan's biggest export, the economic engine driving the country's entire modernization. It was currency, it was a status symbol, and in some regions it became an art form so specific it could only have happened there. On Amami Oshima Island, they developed a technique of dyeing silk in iron-rich mud, a 1,300-year-old process that produces a famously deep, dark textile. You have to respect the hustle, taking worm spit and dirt and turning it into one of the 3 great textiles of the world. Farming firepower, Shirakawa's secret of saltpeter. My pleasant understanding of Japanese silk production, a cozy story about worms and mulberry leaves, had just settled in. I had accepted that the charming gasshō-zukuri farmhouses were designed for the comfort of insects. But how do you square a place built on the delicate art of fashion with the crude business of war? It turns out these homes were not just for couture, they were also clandestine arms factories. The whole setup was an ingenious feedback loop. The house warmed the worms in the attic, and the worms paid the mortgage with their thread. This idyllic scene, however, had a darker, more explosive layer. The villagers weren't just in the clothing business, they were in the munitions industry. They collected silkworm droppings, mixed them with soil, straw and human waste in pits under the floorboards, and left the foul concoction to compost. This was not some forward-thinking organic fertilizer program. They were making saltpeter, a key ingredient in gunpowder. While the worms were the village's primary income, transforming their waste into the stuff of explosives was a close and very profitable second. For centuries, this quiet, remote village was a secret production center for the powerful Kaga domain. As the local lord, Maeda Tsunanori, wrote in a 1686 memo that has all the charm of a corporate directive, gunpowder is a primary instrument of military preparation. You should order the officials in charge of it to see to its manufacture, and to the storing of it. He conveniently left out the part where the process began with a bug's bowel movement. This whole history was swirling in my head as we explored a model village. My son, unconcerned with the finer points of 17th century weapons procurement, was conducting his own experiments. He got himself into trouble for testing the wobble capacity of a suspension bridge with his entire body, an act that made his mother deeply unhappy. After a brief but firm lecture on public infrastructure, he and I amused ourselves by hunting for frogs and salamanders in the crystal-clear drainage ditches, of which there were a ton. We even managed to catch a skink. Inside one of the farmhouses, we found a pair of taxidermy bears that looked like they had lumbered out of a bar fight they decisively lost. For lunch, we sat down to cold soba noodles, a civilized pause from contemplating medieval explosives. The noodles were perfectly chilled, a clean and simple pleasure. We relaxed for a bit, waiting for our bus to arrive. Just before we left, my son pulled me over to an irrigation ditch. The water was so clear you could count the stones on the bottom. Swimming in lazy circles were some of the largest trout I have ever seen, fish so absurdly fat they looked like they had eaten all their competitors and were now waiting for dessert. It was a scene of absolute peace. The quiet surface of the water revealed nothing of the valley's explosive history, and the giant fish gliding beneath were completely unaware they were living in a retired weapons depot. Pious Pyramid, the peculiar path to a painter's purpose. We were on our way out of the mountains, leaving a world of secret gunpowder recipes and my son's personal vendetta against the structural integrity of suspension bridges, when I saw it. What does a community do for an encore after turning silkworm poop into a strategic military asset? Apparently, it lets a cult build a giant golden pyramid next door. There it was, squatting in a valley off the side of the road like a misplaced piece of ancient Mesopotamia. It was not the sort of thing one expects to find between quaint villages. The structure looked as if a Bond villain had won the lottery and decided his summer home needed to be visible from space. A quick search revealed it was a museum, so on our way back we made a point to visit. If the exterior was baffling, the story behind it was even stranger. The place is called the Hikaru Museum. Its founder, a man named Okada Kotama, apparently lost everything in World War II and decided the most practical way to rebuild was to start his own religion, as one does. His guiding philosophy was that great works of art possess a kind of crystalline energy. And this building, a Hall of Light, was constructed in 1999 to house his very expensive, very energetic collection. The whole project was bankrolled by his followers, costing a sum roughly equivalent to the gross domestic product of a small, financially stable island nation. The building itself looks like a giant ziggurat as designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, with a deep appreciation for both ancient Babylon and modern airport terminals. It is the sort of magnificent, baffling structure you would get if you airlifted the Metropolitan Museum of Art and dropped it into rural Tennessee. Inside, a cavernous hall is supported by just 4 massive pillars, an engineering trick borrowed from bridge design. The hall was also completely empty. We were nearly the only visitors, a fact made funnier by a small, polite sign warning that in case of a large crowd, rising CO2 levels could cause drowsiness. We promised to breathe responsibly. The paradox of the place was its collection, a spectacular jumble that tried to answer the question, what kind of divine message requires a T-Rex, a set of hokusai prints, and a chair fit for a regional dictator? We wandered past life-sized dinosaur skeletons, ancient Roman glass, and samurai armor. It was like walking through the attic of a time traveler with a shopping problem. In one corner we found a bizarre ornate marble throne room with a curved floor, with a statue of the founder at the center, presumably for receiving supplicants or just making it harder for them to ask for their money back. Finally, we located the main event, Hokusai's complete series of 36 views of Mount Fuji, including the iconic Great Wave off Kanagawa. They were all there, hung in a quiet, perfectly lit hall. After the dinosaurs and the cult leader's psychodrama, the simple, profound beauty of the prints was almost jarring. Here was something that needed no bizarre backstory or strange architecture to justify its existence. They were magnificent. They were inspiring. They made me want to start my own series, 36 Views of Lookout Mountain. The Colonel Who Became a Prophet, Okada Kotama's Road to Revelation. Leaving the Hokusai prints, I felt an artistic spark. I was going to make my own series of woodblock prints. 36 views of my hotel minibar. But that ambition was immediately sidetracked by a different kind of creation. The Hikaru Museum itself, this golden ziggurat in the middle of nowhere, was clearly the product of a faith with some inventive theological footnotes. The collection mixed priceless artifacts and dinosaur bones with things that made you stop and ask, "I'm sorry, what?" Chief among these was a throne room that looked like it was designed for a North Korean dictator, provided that dictator suffered from a chronic inner ear problem. To understand why a room built for receiving supplicants would be tilted at a confounding angle, you have to understand the man who inspired it. Okada Kotama. His life was a 20th century Japanese epic told in two wildly different acts. Act 1 was all military discipline and national service. Born in Tokyo in 1901, he followed his father into the Imperial Army, saw combat in China, and climbed the ladder to lieutenant colonel. His career was on a solid trajectory until it was derailed by a horse. He fell off, sustained a severe spinal injury, and was saddled with a problem that would quite literally throw him off balance for the rest of his days. Act 2 began after the war, when the script got weird. Like most former officers on the losing side, Okada had nothing. Air raids had vaporized his businesses, and he was buried in debt. It was in this moment of physical agony and financial ruin that he started his spiritual quest. He fell in with another new religion, Sekai Kyusei Kyo, which dealt in spiritual purification. Then, on February 27, 1959, the pivotal moment arrived. At 58 years old and burning with a high fever, he claimed God slid into his DMs with a direct revelation. A voice commanded him, "Rise, your name shall be Kotama, ball of light. Raise your hand. The world has entered severe times." This was his big reboot. He was no longer a failed soldier with a bad back. He was a messenger of God on a mission to purify humanity with true light. His organization grew fast. After Okada died in 1974, without bothering to name a successor, the movement fractured in a legal battle. The faction that ended up with his daughter, Kishu Okada, is the one that built this museum, which finally explains the throne room. The tilted floor isn't a bizarre design flaw. It's a tribute, an architectural nod to the founder whose life was permanently knocked askew by one clumsy equine encounter. The room's geometry is less about divine proportion and more about a divine chiropractic adjustment. promised prosperity, the potent pull of Japan's popular prophets. With the story of its founder Okada Kotama fresh in my mind, a question began to form. How exactly does a man go from being a decorated officer in the Imperial Army to a spiritual guru who convinces thousands of people he can shoot God's light from his palms? And more importantly, was he an outlier, or just the one who managed to build the best pyramid? It turns out Okada was less a lone wolf, and more the lead singer of a whole new genre of spiritual rock and roll that swept across Japan. These movements are called Shinshukyo, or New Religions, and they blossomed particularly after World War II, a time when a nation's old certainties had been thoroughly dismantled. The business model for starting one seems remarkably consistent. Step 1. Have a charismatic founder receive a direct message from the Almighty, preferably during a high fever or after a major life crisis. This gives you branding rights. Step 2. Don't make potential customers choose. Blend in some popular elements from established faiths like Shinto and Buddhism. It's a spiritual buffet where you can pile your plate high with reincarnation, ancestor spirits, and a reverence for purity. The real innovation, the killer app, was the focus on this worldly benefits. These groups promised not just enlightenment in the next life, but tangible results in this one, like healing your bad back, fixing your marriage, or boosting your bank account. It's a powerful pitch. Who wouldn't sign up for salvation if it also came with a better stock portfolio? This brings us back to Okada Kotama and his Tsukyo Mahikari, which, after his death, was carried on by his daughter. Their core practice is the art of true light, where trained practitioners radiate divine light from their hands to purify others. But if zapping spiritual clouds with your hands isn't your style, there are plenty of other options on the market. There's Soka Gakkai, a branch of Nichiren Buddhism that has a C-suite executive's approach to efficiency. Their main practice is chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo to unlock one's inner Buddha and achieve a human revolution. They were so successful, especially with their post-war break and subdue recruiting methods, that they decided to get into politics. They founded their own party, the Komeito, in 1964. The religion and the party are officially separate now, wink wink, but they remain what you might call extremely close friends who vote the same way on every issue. If that sounds too intense, perhaps Tenrikyo is more your speed. Founded in 1838 by a peasant woman named Nakayama Miki, it teaches that our problems are caused by mental dusts. You can achieve a joyous life by sweeping these dusts away through charity and good deeds. It's a refreshingly tidy approach to divinity. Then there's Seiko no Ai, which adopted the American New Thought idea that the world is a reflection of your mind. Basically, all your problems, including sickness, are just bugs in your personal software that can be fixed with meditation and positive affirmations. The award for Best Evil Lair Architecture, however, goes to Ryukai. Its headquarters in Tokyo is a colossal, stark black granite building nicknamed the Bolt. It looks less like a place to contemplate the Lotus Sutra and more like where a villain in a spy movie would unveil his plan to corner the world's molybdenum market. In a beautifully pragmatic twist, this ominous structure also houses a giant water reservoir for the neighborhood to use in an emergency. It's the perfect paradox, a doomsday movie headquarters that also functions as a responsible civic utility. Now, it would be easy to look at this spiritual landscape and dismiss it as a collection of oddities. But that would be missing the point. These movements offered answers, community, and a sense of control when an entire country felt it had lost its way. They are a direct response to the immense ruptures of the 20th century, a testament to the human need to build something new when the old world is in ashes, even if that new thing is a giant pyramid in a quiet mountain valley. Poisonous prophecy, preaching peace, preparing poison. Not every new religious movement in Japan channels its donations into building giant pyramid museums. Most, like the ones that sprouted up after World War II, focus on more traditional goals like promising health, wealth, or the ability to radiate purifying light from your palms. They choose to be quirky, occasionally pushy, but generally harmless. It's comforting to think that spiritual groups are, at their core, about making life better. But every now and then, a group comes along that looks at the rulebook of peaceful coexistence and decides to use it for kindling. Enter Aum Shinrikyo and its founder, Shoko Asahara. Here was a man who decided to create a belief system like a potluck dinner, where everyone brought something from a different dimension. He mixed early Buddhism with the destructive power of a Hindu god, tossed in some yoga and, for the grand finale, added a heavy dose of Christian apocalyptic prophecy. Asahara then declared himself to be Christ and the first enlightened one since Buddha, which is a bit like claiming you wrote the Quran and also discovered the laws of gravity. He promised followers, including a truly shocking number of brilliant scientists and engineers, that he could teach them to fly. As the group grew more secretive, convinced the world was out to get them, their ambitions shifted from levitation to liquidation. They began manufacturing weapons at their compound near Mount Fuji. What do you do when you believe a nuclear Armageddon is just around the corner and you need a private place to build a doomsday arsenal? For Aum, the answer was obvious. Buy a 500,000-acre sheep station in the Australian outback. This desolate property, Banjawan Station, became the cult's personal evil genius laboratory. There they successfully cooked up the nerve agent sarin and, in a field test that has to be a low point in agricultural history, killed about 24 sheep. Their scientific resume was alarmingly broad. They successfully made VX, a nerve agent even nastier than sarin, and used it in several assassinations. They tried and failed to weaponize botulism and anthrax, apparently because they used a harmless vaccine strain for the latter. It's a strange sort of incompetence, like a bank robber who meticulously plans a heist but forgets to bring a bag for the money. How do you gather some of the nation's brightest minds and still mess up the simple part of acquiring the deadly version of a germ? Before their infamous attack on Tokyo, they held a dress rehearsal. In 1994, members drove a refrigerator truck into the city of Matsumoto and released sarin, killing 8 people and injuring hundreds. The target was a building where judges presiding over a lawsuit against the cult lived. It was a horrifying preview of their capabilities, and for a short time, police and media blamed an innocent local man who had the misfortune of living nearby. The main event came on March 20th, 1995. During Tokyo's morning rush hour, 5 cult members boarded separate subway trains headed for the government district. Their weapon delivery system was terrifyingly simple, plastic bags filled with liquid sarin, which they punctured with the tips of their umbrellas. The invisible, odorless poison spread through the cars and stations, killing 13 and injuring over 6,000 people. In a single morning, the attack ripped apart Japan's deeply held sense of public safety. An umbrella, a symbol of everyday preparedness, became an instrument of terror. The aftermath was a national reckoning. Police raided Aum's facilities across the country, arresting Asahara and hundreds of followers. The trials dragged on for years, concluding in 2018 with the execution of Asahara and 12 of his top lieutenants. The word Shinshukyo, which had been a neutral term for new religions, was scrubbed from the public vocabulary and replaced with the sinister karuto, or cult. Lawmakers scrambled to revise the religious corporation law, adding oversight to ensure a group's tax-exempt status couldn't double as a license to stockpile chemical weapons. Down in Australia, the government had its own moment of blushing embarrassment, launching inquiries into how a doomsday cult managed to test weapons of mass destruction on their soil without anyone noticing. The organization itself splintered into smaller groups that are still watched closely by the authorities. It was not the most inspiring story to come out of Japan's modern spiritual landscape. Cosmic Crash, a cult's covert coincidence. As we've established, the Aum Shinrikyo cult was not just a collection of eccentrics with a new take on enlightenment. After buying a 500,000-acre sheep station in the Australian outback, a piece of real estate so remote it made the moon look like a bustling suburb, they weren't just planning to count sheep, they were playing with chemicals that could unmake people. But their work on nerve agents, grim as it was, might have just been the warm-up act for a much, much bigger show. Imagine Wile E. Coyote, after finally receiving his PhD in applied physics from Acme University, deciding to test his masterpiece rocket in a place where no one could possibly get hurt, except maybe a few confused wallabies. That's the sort of energy surrounding the night of May 28, 1993. Prospectors and the few other souls scattered across the Great Victoria Desert saw a flash of light so brilliant it turned midnight to noon. It was followed by a boom that rattled windows and a tremor that shook the ground. The event registered on seismographs as a blast equivalent to 1 or 2 kilotons of TNT, which is a polite way of saying it was the size of a very small, very tactical nuclear weapon. This is where the story splits into 2 paths. Path 1 is the doomsday cult bomb theory. The location of the blast just happened to be near Banjawan Station, where Shoko Asahara's scientists were, at that very moment, known to be dabbling in weapons of mass destruction and prospecting for uranium. The timing was so perfect, it felt scripted. A 1995 US Senate investigation looked at all the facts, scratched its collective head, and concluded that the theory of Aum testing a secret bomb was entirely credible. This wasn't some late-night talk radio conspiracy. It was a scenario that made people in government buildings lose sleep. Then there is Path 2, the big rock from space theory. This is the explanation favored by scientists, a group whose job often involves telling you the spectacular thing you saw was actually just swamp gas. They argue the event was a bolide, a large meteor that screamed into our atmosphere and exploded in an airburst. This neatly explains the flash, the boom, and the tremor without involving any apocalyptic plots. It also explains why investigators never found a crater or any weird radioactive signatures, because the explosion happened miles up in the sky. Herein lies the paradox. The scientific evidence almost unanimously supports the meteor theory. The wiggles on the seismographs look more like a sky bang than a ground bang. The lack of a hole in the ground is a pretty convincing argument. Yet, in intelligence circles, the story refuses to die. The coincidence of a cult with nuclear ambitions camped out at the precise epicenter of a mysterious explosion is just too loud to ignore. Science points to a cosmic accident, but human nature points a finger directly at the guys who are trying to end the world. The mystery remains, officially unsolved and largely forgotten by the public. For the scientific community, it's a closed case of a spectacular natural phenomenon. For everyone else, it's a chilling footnote in history, a question mark hanging over the empty desert. The event remains a historical loose end, suspended between a rational explanation and a terrifying possibility, like a cloud of nerve gas that never quite touches the ground. Fatal faith. A premier's pact and a party's poison. Just when you think you've got a handle on the layers of a place, Japan pulls a trapdoor. 1 minute I'm contemplating the subtle difference between a genuine Australian doomsday cult bomb and a coincidental space rock, and the next I'm confronted with a story that makes that mystery look straightforward. The assassination of Shinzo Abe on July 8, 2022 wasn't a shock just because it happened in a country where you could probably leave a wallet full of cash on a park bench and find it the next day with an apologetic note for being moved by the wind. It was a shock because the story everyone thought they were reading, a political thriller, turned out to be something else entirely. A grim family drama about bad investments and God. The world saw the footage and assumed it knew the plot. A political extremist with a political motive kills Japan's most famous modern politician. But the shooter, Tetsuya Yamagami, wasn't angry about Abe's policies. He was angry about his mother's bank account. His fury was aimed at the Unification Church, an organization he believed had charmed his mother into donating their family's entire fortune, over 100 million yen, driving them into ruin. He saw Abe, who once sent a video message to a church-affiliated group, as the organization's most powerful public relations manager. He couldn't get to the church's leadership, so he went for their most famous friend. So, how does a bizarre religious group from South Korea become the ghost in Japan's political machine? The Unification Church, founded by Sun Myung-moon in 1954, found fertile ground in post-war Japan. It became infamous for its unique business model, which can best be described as aggressive spiritual sales. Followers were pressured into buying wildly overpriced items like ginseng tea or marble vases to cleanse their families of ancestral sins. It's a bold move, telling someone their grandfather's bad karma can be fixed for the low price of a new sedan. To make this work on a national scale, you need powerful allies. The church found its most important ally in Nobusuke Kishi, Shinzo Abe's own grandfather. After his term as prime minister, Kishi helped the church set up shop in Japan in the 1950s. He saw their militant anti-communism as a useful tool in the Cold War, creating one of history's stranger partnerships. The Conservative Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, got a disciplined army of volunteers and a reliable bloc of voters. The church got a stamp of legitimacy and a shield from scrutiny. This arrangement hummed along quietly in the background for over half a century, a secret handshake between the pulpit and the parliament. Abe's death instantly turned that handshake into a public wrestling match. The media pried open the relationship, and suddenly hundreds of LDP politicians were scrambling to explain why their names were on the church's holiday card list. The government's approval ratings dove. The LDP, facing a full-blown scandal, was forced to conduct an internal review and publicly swear off the very organization that had been its loyal partner for decades. The assassination didn't just end one man's life, it dragged a 60-year-old secret into the sunlight, leaving the country's ruling party standing there, blinking and exposed. Divine and Dinner, from doctrines of deities to daily details. Our recent education on Japanese cults had focused on the new kids on the block, the post-war groups with their aggressive fundraising and political ties. It was an education in retail-level devotion. It was an education prompted by the assassination of a prime minister. But today I was thinking about the original, the wholesale model. I was thinking about state Shinto. After all, a modern cult might get its followers to buy expensive tea, but the Meiji government got an entire nation to buy into the divinity of the emperor. That's not just a successful startup, that's a state-sponsored, hostile takeover of the national consciousness. To accomplish this, they first had to perform some corporate restructuring. In 1868, they forced a messy breakup between Shinto and Buddhism, a process that sounds less like spiritual cleansing and more like a national divorce, with one partner getting the house and the other being told they were a mere religion. A 40-minute walk back to the hotel offers plenty of time to ponder how one goes about manufacturing a god. The intellectual groundwork had already been laid by nationalist scholars who wanted to scrub Japan clean of foreign influence, creating a pure, high-octane version of Shinto. When the new government took power, pragmatic leaders saw the political genius in it. Why build a country on boring ideals like liberty when you have a direct descendant of the sun goddess on hand? It fused patriotism with piety so completely that being a good citizen meant being a good believer. The whole operation was overseen by a Department of Divinity, which must have had the most interesting business cards in government. This state-run enterprise became the spiritual fuel for the empire, justifying military expansion with the logic that you can't argue with a country led by a living deity. It's hard to debate foreign policy with someone whose boss is the sun. In the 1930s and 1940s, this ideology became the spiritual fuel for Japanese militarism, providing a sacred justification for war. It fostered a belief in Japan's divine mission and demanded ultimate sacrifice from soldiers, who viewed dying for a living god as the highest honor. After World War II, the Allied occupation swiftly dismantled the entire structure of state Shinto, forcing the separation of shrine and state and compelling the emperor to renounce his divinity. This brought an end to this unprecedented chapter of state-sponsored religion in Japan. And after untangling the history of a state-sponsored religion that powered a world war, we faced a much more immediate crisis: finding a Korean restaurant for dinner. Our quest failed. We defaulted, as all pilgrims eventually do, to the fluorescent sanctuary of the local mall. There, I ate curry and a Haida beef croquette, a local delicacy I am sure is best enjoyed under the hum of an escalator. It was a perfectly fried sphere of potato and beef. My son, in a display of unwavering faith that would have made the Meiji government proud, had a crepe. Click, clack. The sound of the ticket machine confirmed our travel plans for tomorrow, all set. And that brings us to the close of Chapter 19, an echo in an empty archive, showing how a simple visit to a historic site evolved into a complex inquiry of spiritual movements and political history. In the next chapter, our focus shifts from the spiritual to the aesthetic as we explore Toyama's reinvention as a glass city and its striking Kengo-kuma-designed museum. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Shinkansen and Sensibility. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. Thank you for listening to The Rise the Limit.